Yeah, all right. But then it won't be recorded. Can I just go, or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, Rich is gonna walk you through some use cases and scenarios from an IR perspective with Carbon Black. So, with that, how many in this room? I know a few faces here. How many of you have sat through a Bit9 presentation before? Thought so. Okay. All right. Well, some of you might learn something new. Some of you might want me to stop talking, but I'm going to tell you something extremely profound first, and that is that antivirus does not stop APTs. So I know every presentation starts off with something like this, so I'm going to breeze through it. We all know that antivirus is like a screen door. It stops bugs, but it doesn't stop intruders. I can't take credit for that. I thought it was pretty unique, though. We know it takes way too much time to detect and respond to incidents. And we also know that compliance is a burden. It's not anything we all like to do. If those of you who do not have to report up to risk in compliance, then be very grateful that you do not have to. But it is certainly some pain that all of you are probably, or some of you are probably facing today. So one of the interesting statistics I found, because I've probably been at Bit9 since around 2010, so good for me that it's growing. But the most invested security solution in the past 5-6 years after a breach is endpoint security. And that's, frankly, in my opinion, just because it's been largely ignored. There wasn't a lot of vendors out there. And people are afraid because the endpoint is so sensitive. You don't want to disrupt business. So you got to be really careful as to what types of technologies you put on there. So I thought this was an interesting study I just wanted to share with you. We're seeing a very big uptick in people upgrading their endpoint security and also from the data security intelligence solutions to gather all that information. So what's really wrong with it today? A lot of this you already know, but please just appease me and take a quick listen. Really, at the end of the day, what's wrong with traditional endpoint security and, frankly, some of the next-gen ones that have come out there today? The challenge I always talk to people about is if the FBI calls and says, hey, listen, there's this malware running rampant through your industry. Beware. Is it running anywhere in your endpoints? Everybody gets a queasy stomachache because they can't answer that question as to what's running today right now. It's very difficult to do that. If you can't recognize what's running today, you certainly aren't going to know what ran yesterday from a historical perspective to be able to go and remediate and contain what happens. A lot of the technologies also are looking at known bad. We all know, everybody knows what known bad is, and signature-based on detection and response and prevention is a little bit outdated. And then if you really can't correlate your network with your endpoint and understand the full life cycle of what's happening in your environment, it leaves you blind there. And at the end of the day, all these drive the fact that you can't truly remediate. Remediation is not just reimaging a machine. It is understanding root cause, how it happened, and how to go back and change the behavior and put up the right security protections to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I've talked in my 6 years with a lot of you and a lot of CISOs in the industry, but my organization has talked to more. And so when we look at the different types of levels of threat security out there and from an endpoint perspective, we really put them in 4 different types of categories. And just when you take a look at this, we won't walk through it on a lot of detail, but take a look and say, where am I now and where would I like to be in the future? The real vulnerable organizations are really do not have that visibility, and they're relying on antivirus really as their protection. So they're using known bad techniques, AV signatures to stop them. They're re-imaging machines, and they have no root cause analysis as to how something happened. And it's very siloed in their businesses. So they don't have any tool aggregating all the information from their tools. So it's considered, a level 1 very vulnerable. Some organizations are now beefing up endpoint security and reducing the risk by having sensors out there that are doing more of polling or scanning of the information that's on the endpoint. So in my opinion, it's a little bit more reactive, but at least you're getting the intelligence as to what's running on those endpoints, even if it's after the fact. The new detection techniques, they're using some reputation data, algorithms to be able to detect known bad or known malicious activity that's going on. And from a prevention standpoint, best practice is to remove admin rights. If you can remove admin rights, we all know that's a great first step, is to prevent certain attacks, but it's not the best thing you can do. And then leveraging some of the free whitelisting tools like an app blocker to do some basic blocking and anti-exploitation. Again, from a root cause, and it's more of a manual from a response perspective, and now starting to correlate information from a SIM perspective. A lot of customers that I'm talking to are really getting into the stronger posture, which is, okay, we now have a sensor out there that's gathering real-time visibility. We understand the DVR recording and what's happening on the endpoint. We are starting to go ahead and put some sort of single source detections in place, and threat intelligence in place, and using kind of simple indicators of compromise. From a banning perspective, I call custom bans more of dynamic blacklisting. You're still looking for known bad. You're still doing from a blacklisting perspective. And more automation down in the last two categories. To me, the holy grail from the best protection standpoint is continue to have that real-time visibility, but more from an open perspective. So there is certainly more than one threat intelligence feed out there in the world. We all use multiple ones. So they all just need to get together and have an open infrastructure to go ahead and integrate. And now, instead of indicators of compromise, you're looking at patterns of behavior. Big difference in between those two. And from a prevention standpoint, it's more of looking at, how change occurs in your environment and only allowing that change to occur from a default deny prevention strategy. And then, of course, during a response, reacting in real time and having the containment as things occur. So these are just the different levels of security. I'm happy to pass along. I know it's being recorded, some of these slides. Some people use this type of slide when they're positioning things or pitching to their management, but it's just something that we tend to look at and educate. So what do you need? We hear this from a lot of organizations that are out there, a lot of the endpoint security. You really need the full life cycle. You need visibility, detection, prevention, response. We all know that. It's easier said than done. But we feel that you need the whole complete security lifecycle. Open. We're not all a one-stop shop. We want to integrate with other products in the stack. You want to be able to share information with all the threat intelligence groups that you're a part of. So keep it open and integrate, and not dealing with just one throat to choke, as people would say. Obviously, something that delivers against in compliance in an ease fashion. Security obviously drives compliance, and vice versa. Multi-platform. Anybody that you partner with needs to be able to have coverage across multiple platforms. The area you leave blind is probably the area the adversary is going to find. And last but not least, proven, reliable, scalable. Dealing with endpoints is very sensitive, as I talked about up front. So certainly want to partner with somebody that has the experience. So it's almost like I wanted to do a drum roll, because I just basically set up as to what Bit9 can deliver on, right? So this is really my only commercial slide, but what I like to just point out is these three bullets over here, because this is third parties basically validating the Carbon Black solution. So if you were to have an unfortunate incident, you call one of these 30-plus IR firms, you say, I need your help. They are going to send you Carbon Black licenses. They're going to get in their car or their plane and drive to your organization, and by the time they're there, you're going to have it deployed out. They leverage Carbon Black as their endpoint visibility solution to respond to incidents. Same thing on the MSSPs. We have 30-plus partners that leverage the Carbon Black technology when they delivered managed services. So it's third-party validation, just not me telling you. They looked at a lot of other technologies and they chose us, so it's really great. When you talk about Carbon Black and Bit9 together, we really offer you the full life cycle. We talked about it earlier. It's visibility, prevention, detection, and response, and be able to run across all solutions, all endpoints. So we do support Mac, Linux, and Windows, obviously, and run on machines that you couldn't imagine that have operating systems that allow us to be ran on across the world. No, we do not have mobile. Nope. We actually spun up mobile a couple times and then stopped, waiting to see what the market was going to do, and we're still now kind of deciding what we want to do. If we do, it'll be more down the Carbon Black side. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So kind of the different... Go ahead, Si. On this slide, we do not cover integration. Right here is the whole snapshot of our product portfolio. It's going to be tough to see back there. There's a lot of logos down here, and it grows every single day. We probably have a technology alliance that we built today. Our point is we're completely open. We're not the end-all, be-all. You have already products you already bought. You have products you're going to invest in. So how can we make it the best to be able to have your network security product talk to your endpoint security product? How can we get as many threat intelligence into our threat intelligence cloud to help you classify what's going on and help you detect? We have integrations with Microsoft also on the Carbon Black and the Bit9 side for those that are leveraging IMIT in their Microsoft AV. But as a quick snapshot, Bit9 and Carbon Black merged about a year and a half ago. So we do have, it is two products that integrate where it makes sense. I have customers that purchase both products and put both on each endpoint because that is the ultimate protection. Bit9 application control, you can harden the system 100%, but we're never going to sit here and say we're going to stop every single thing that's going to come in. So Carbon Black is always there from an IR perspective. We have customers that put Carbon Black everywhere and Bit9 on their critical systems. Areas in their organization that culturally allows them to get into that hard, high enforcement state where only trusted change occurs. So Bit9 is more, does offer a significant amount of visibility, prevention, and response with that one sensor. Carbon Black is like Bit9 on steroids from a visibility standpoint, and it's built for security operations centers and IR folks, and it provides a vast amount of visibility. And that's what we're going to focus on a lot today. Both of them are built on API, so that's why we have published out on GitHub a bunch of integrations that we offer, including all the logos that you see down there. Any questions? Okay. So from the TIC, well, it's actually a terrible acronym, but our threat intelligence cloud, it's called TIC, which is a bug with malware. It just, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. But either way, our threat intelligence cloud is one that feeds both products and both platforms. It feeds the whole entire platform. It comprises of threat indicators, reputation, and attack classification. And there's two ways we feed that. Our threat research team that we have built clearly has a lot of intelligence. As we're running on 7 million plus endpoints, we understand and we acknowledge that things are happening out there, and we help give that to other organizations. And then, of course, third parties. We're not going to subject you just to our threat intelligence. There's others that are out there that are included in our package, and if you have others that we can obviously won't go into the TIC, but it will go into Carbon Black, which Rich will show you. So obviously having all this endpoint and continuous data collection, we're bouncing it off all this threat intelligence and patterns of behavior to give you a pretty good picture of what you're dealing with. So with that, before I pass this off, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of us out there from an endpoint security perspective, and why I've been at Bit9 for 6+ years is kind of listed on this. I feel like we're at the cutting edge. When I look at visibility, detection, prevention, response, everybody's touting that. The biggest difference with Bit9 is how that visibility occurs. We are a DVR in the endpoint. Rich will show you that today. So having that video camera of constantly watching and gathering specific attributes and submitting them back into your on-prem server or cloud, however you want to get it deployed, is extremely important because how you have visibility is what drives everything else that you do. If you have reactive visibility or slow visibility, your prevention's going to be slow, your detection's going to be slow, and you're going to always be trying to chase your tail and catch up. So having that information at your fingertips as quick as possible is the most important. And then another big differentiator is how we do prevention. It's not all about behavior. Everybody is going to understand a way to get around behavior. It's about hash-based. It's about how change occurs on your machines and only allowing that change to occur. And from a broadest OS coverage, I think that probably shows we can cover most of what you have going on. And then, of course, open. We'll always be in the class of openness with all other products that are out there. So with that, any questions before I have Rich show you the presentation? Thank you for listening to me. I didn't, hopefully it wasn't too salesy. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a good understanding as to why we feel Bit9 has the right technology. They were, yeah.
capabilities they need to be able to react and respond quick. It's all about reducing that dwell time.
All right, so now I get to show you the product, but I want to talk a little bit about it first, and about letting you estimate what is your level of security. What's your security posture? We've talked about Bit9, and as a security professional, if you can get there, that's the place to go, right? Bit9 is about only allowing trusted software to run. If you think about what does antivirus do, software fits into 3 categories: known and good, known and bad, and this big swath in the middle that's called unknown. Guess what? AV, if it's not in this known bad, it lets everything else run. Bit9, in high enforcement, has the other approach. If it's not known good, it doesn't get to run. That's going to stop the malware. However, that's also going to prevent your boss from downloading and installing TurboTax on April 14th. That might not be popular. You might not be able to get there. So the reason we're talking about Carbon Black today is because if you can't get to high enforcement, what you need to do is empower your incident response team to understand exactly what happened on the endpoints and keep it from happening again. That malware is exploiting some vulnerability. You need to find out what that vulnerability is. Yes?
Is there use case for putting Bit9 on servers where you have control of every
It's easier. Putting Bit9 on servers, that's often a first place to start because it's a high-profile target, especially domain controllers. If I'm a malicious attacker and I want to own your system, I'm going to go after those admin accounts. I'm going to go after those domain accounts. So by protecting that, one, there isn't a lot of change that occurs on domain controllers or most servers, and so they're easier to get to high enforcement, and they're a likely attack vector. So that's a good place to start, yes. So let's talk about, how many people watch CSI? Yeah, right? One of the 17 different variants out there, right? So CSI, great show. It always starts with some crime scene. Some guy's walking in the room and he's looking at the stain on the rug and broken glass and a hole in the wall. He starts setting lasers up and sends a swath of this off to the lab and waits 3 weeks for them to figure out, was that blood or was that goat blood or was it ketchup? And he's trying to figure out what happened at the crime scene. If there was a DVR in that room, rewind, play, 5 minutes, the show would be over, right? Carbon Black is the DVR. You don't have to go through that forensics to try to figure out what happened. And even you're as incredibly good as those people at CSI are, you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss the fact that, oh yes, while he was in that room, he stole this statue off the shelf or stole this painting. You're going to miss that because all you were concerned with was what you saw, which was the blood stain on the floor. Right? So you need to be able to record and know what's going on in the endpoints. And you need to know not what's happening now, you need to know what happened yesterday. So, Carbon Black is recording all of the events that are happening from a process perspective. The process starts. What context did it start in? Did it spawn any child processes? What did it do? Did it modify registry keys, modify files, make inbound or outbound network connections, do cross-process memory injection? So we're capturing that information in the context of its parent and its children when it happened. So we've got the whole timeline of all of that. So when you see something suspicious, you can go back and find out exactly what happened. Rewind the tape, press play. So, with that said, I've got some scenarios up here. I've got an attacker. There are many different ways that attacks occur. This is just one example. So I've got this attacker out here, and he's sent out a spoofing email. Right? He spoofed your boss, he's got a hot link in it, and he's got his hook in the water, and he's sent out 20 of these emails, and he's hoping somebody will click on the link. So you click on the link, looks like it's an email that he wants to download, great file. And he says, all right, I'm going to save it and open it. You see what happens? The attacker says, oh gosh, I got somebody, and he starts doing his attack. You can't read it back there, but there's an IP address, 192.168.230.150, that will come into play later. That's his IP address. Meanwhile, the end user sees nothing, right? That's how most attacks occur. I click on a link and I don't know what happened. Meanwhile, the attacker's just having a good old time. So, we're recording all of these events. As I said, this is a low-friction deployment. You can roll this agent out. It's not going to interfere with things that are going on in your end user's machine, but it's going to allow you to respond and detect. The purpose of Carbon Black is detection, response, and remediation. You don't have any friction about, oh, there's another agent on the system, because people will never even know it's there. Very easy deployment. So, let's go over to the console and take a look. So we've had this information. This is the console. I'll give you a little tour of the console. So the console is a view into that database that has all of that information. I've got a search processes. Think of a Google search up here, and this is the information about all of those processes. When I start a search, I start a filter in there. Remember that actually you probably couldn't read it, small print, but what he clicked on was eventguide.pdf. So let's take one scenario. You get an email from InfraGard that says, there's this attack going on right now, and they're spoofing this executable as eventguide.pdf. It's something you need to look out for. So, oh, I wonder if that has ever happened in my environment. So, I do a search. And down here, sure enough, I see all of these processes. Let me make this a little bigger. A little more screen real estate. So I see eventguide.pdf 2 minutes ago. So it just happened. Oh, so now, let's see. What happens when we get an indicator of compromise? It's an indicator. Doesn't mean your own, it's an indicator. So I need to start, at this point, I'm now acting as judge. I need to figure out, I got an event, it's a suspicious event, I need to determine, was this malicious or not? Well, let's take a look. I've got eventguide.pdf, you can't read it, but that's what it says. And there's a red ring around it that says that was my search criteria. The tan dot in the middle says all of this other metadata is what is information about that process. So I've got the start time, the security context, what directory it ran from, the IP addresses. So I've got information about that, but I also see 2 child processes. So I see QUser and Notepad. Already suspicious, right? Notepad? What is eventguide.pdf doing spawning Notepad? Well, let me see what happened with Notepad. Actually, let's start down here. I told you that we're tracking network connections, file changes, registry modifications. I look at this network connection. Earlier I called out an IP address. 192.168.230.150 on port 4444. You saw that on the attacker's machine. So I've recorded the fact that eventguide.pdf phoned home, and I know where home is. So what else did you do? Now I'm very suspicious. At this point, I should probably say I want to start triage. So I could take a look and say, I could ban that file. So I've got the ability to ban that file for all of the other machines on the network. So that's triage. I've stopped it from propagating. But let's look at a little more detail about what he did with this instance of Notepad.
And that triage function is in black.
Yes. Yep. If you've been looking at us for a while, that was introduced earlier this year. So it is a fairly new feature, but banning is now part of Carbon Black. It is hash-based. It's going to depend on the number of endpoints out there. At the largest deployment for a single cluster at about 40,000, so that's the highest end of the scale, that check-in interval is somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. On smaller scales, the check-in interval is much tighter. So that, as soon as they check in, it's going to be banned. Yeah, smaller scale, the check-in rate is down to as low as a minute. Yeah, it's faster. So, down here I said file modifications. So I'm looking at Notepad, looking at file modifications. And what's the first thing he did? He deleted eventguide.pdf. So the malware only existed on his system for about 30 seconds. Then it's gone. If you're trying to do that forensically, figure out what happened, you'll have no clue. One, we recorded the fact that that was the name of the file, what that event guide.pdf did, and the fact that he spawned a child process that deleted it. Additionally, we captured a copy of it. Any binary smaller than 25 megabytes, we're going to capture that. That's unique in the environment. So we're not going to capture hundreds of copies of Word, but we will capture a unique dropper like this. So you've got it in the library. You can do further detonation, further analysis of it. Keep it in your malware library. Yes?
Did it kill all of the child processes on all the other machines as well?
You have an option to do that. If you want to kill the event guide process, when you ban it, you can also kill it. I'll go into a little more detail on the triage component further on the demo. So, we see that he wiped his tracks. What else did he do? So he spawned PowerShell. So, hard to read, that's why I'm pointing it out up here, that's why I'm doing the dance. Up here, it says PowerShell -encoded command, and then there's the encoded command. So I'm capturing the command line that was used. He ran PowerShell and executed something that wasn't even written to disk. So we've captured that. Very easy to decode that, figure out what he was doing. But I also know what PowerShell did. I can see down here. And I've got another instance of PowerShell that spawned. And I noticed that he made a network connection. This network connection down here, once again, there's the IP address, and it says here's the port, and it's the Bit9 server. So that's the attacker trying to move laterally. So I've captured that. Good news, that server had Bit9 on it, so it didn't run. But he attempted, I've logged the fact that he attempted to do that lateral movement. So, additionally, I noticed that command.exe ran regedit. So he's actually modifying the registry to make some other files persistent. So that's where he's trying to be persistent on the machine. So I've captured what the attacker did. Now you saw the end user, but if you're in the SOC, you haven't seen what the end user did. We started, if we think about from our security perspective, we started with eventguide.pdf. Well, let's go back up the chain in the process tree. And I can see, because of licensing requirements, I didn't use Outlook. I used Thunderbird as my email client. But there's my email client. I've got Thunderbird. I've got the user context. I know that the user clicked on a link in an email. I know how it started. I know who started it. And I know when it happened. I've got the full timeline. So I've got the entire attack on the screen. That's all real time. I just did that. I did a full investigation, well maybe not full, but I did a pretty thorough investigation of what this attack was comprised of in a matter of a couple of minutes. If you're trying to do that forensically, you'll be here for weeks. And now, why is that important? Because if your solution to an incident is re-image that box without determining what the attacker did and how he got in, it's gonna happen again. If you don't know how you got owned, you're gonna get owned again. And if you're doing it forensically, you're not going to figure out how you got owned. This is going to tell you. Now, so I started with detection and saying, we do detection, response, and remediation. Let me now do the response. So at this point, let's close this up. So at some point here, I realized I was owned, right? When I saw him phone home, when I saw him spawn notepad, queue user, somewhere in there I realized this machine is owned and I need to start doing triage. We banned it, great, but what other triage should I do? Well, I can isolate the host. So right now, I've just scheduled this host back here. That's our infected machine. He's scheduled to be isolated. So now, he's isolated from the network. He can no longer phone home. He can't move laterally. The only person he can talk to is this server. Well, why would you want him to talk to this server? Because you want to do remediation or further investigation. So, at this point, I can do go live, and I've now connected a remote command shell to that machine. List my processes. So I've got a list of processes. I can upload and download files. I can execute code on that machine, modify registry keys, gather a memory dump, and kill processes. So here, I still have Adobe Reader running in the background there, and I see that that is 1168. So if you'll watch, boom. So I just killed the process. So that's the start of my remediation. So I've isolated him, remotely connected to him, and we're not providing an additional set of credentials. We're already an agent on the machine running a system. So you don't, it's not like doing RDP where you might be giving the user, the attacker, a set of remote credentials. We're not providing additional credentials. We're already authenticated to the system. And he can't go out. So, I've covered that remediation. Now let's go back to detection. In this case, I started by typing in eventguide.pdf. But what if I'm not reading dark reading? What if there are other smart people out there? It's only me. How can I know everything to look for? That's where integration comes in. Threat intelligence. As TJ said, we're very open. We're very open to integration, and we realize that there are a lot of smart guys out there wearing white hats. So, as part of the product, we have integrated threat intelligence feeds. So, these are part of the product. All of those hash values that we're collecting, we're running up against VirusTotal automatically. You can opt out, of course, but we're putting those hash values up and getting the reputation service. And we're keeping track of that. So if I look up, if this process looks up a hash value today, and VirusTotal says, I don't have any information on it. You can opt in to upload the binaries. That's an opt-in. But if that value changes 2 days from now or a week from now, we're going to generate an alert that says, VirusTotal now knows that this malware, or this hash value that executed on this machine a week ago, it was malicious. It's going to generate an alert. So now you know, rather than just whistling past the graveyard, that, oh, well, it hasn't happened since then. We have, as you notice, abuse.ch, Alien Vault. We have our own threat intelligence feeds. And our threat intelligence feeds are doing things that are looking for not just what we typically call the indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise are the hash values, domains, IP addresses, the things that are fairly static. But what we're seeing with malware these days is the hash values may change. There's a lot of polymorphic code out there, but the techniques that they use are going to be very similar. So let's say an attack uses SVC host. It launches an instance of SVC host, but it's launching it in a user context. We're capturing that fact. We're capturing the fact that SVC host ran, but it ran in an unusual security context, and we can generate an alert. Now, I'm not asking you to know that that should be. Our threat intelligence feed, this one over there, advanced threats, it's got about 50 different watch lists in there, for lack of a better term, that are monitoring these indicators of attack. Files masquerading as executables with PDF extensions. So all of those are going to be trapped and generate alerts. Malware domain list, Tor, Threat Connect. We also integrate with on-site, on-premise firewalls, so we're consuming that feed information. So these firewalls, Fidelis, FireEye, Checkpoint, they're all great. Great products for looking at what is coming into your network. But they're saying, hey, this is malicious. They're not saying it executed. They're saying it came in through the firewall. Well, what if it's for something that you already patched? You patched 2 months ago. It's not really an actionable alert. How do you correlate the fact that FireEye said this is malicious code with did it run in my environment? We're doing that correlation. We consume that as a threat feed, and we will generate an alert that says FireEye said this was bad, and it ran on this machine just now. So the threat intelligence is allowing you to leverage the community. We also have a connector for Styx Taxi, so if there are other threat intelligence feeds that you want to pipe into this system, and all of these events can be spit out to your analytics tool or your SIM or both. So if you're Splunk users or ArcSight, any of those, we can feed this information into them. Earlier you asked about integration. What specific integration were you looking for?
Well, this is one of the 5 that was hit on the chart. So, curious
So, which one was?
well, integration. When you were on slide,
Oh.
4 of the 5.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the integration, the problem is there's so many logos in the integration side now, it would take over the whole slide. And we are, all of this interface is published out on GitHub, so it's an open API. We've got a RESTful API as well as other APIs available. So in addition to these threat intelligence feeds, let's say we did a search for that event guide.pdf and we didn't get a hit. We can create our own watch lists. So there is a language, it's not really a scripting language, but you can describe, hey, I want an unsigned binary launched SVC host. Notepad made more than 0 network connections, so it made 1 or more network connections. Those types of queries are all down in these watch lists. You can generate your own, and you can determine what happens. They can just be things that you store to go threat hunting on occasion. You can also look for example, in this attack, we had PowerShell running the encoded command. Since we're capturing that command line, we can look for that, and if you see PowerShell running with the encoded command parameter, generate an alert, generate a watch list. It's also scriptable. I had a prospect that when a machine was potentially compromised, they had a series of things that they wanted to do on that machine. They wanted to collect certain information. So literally I had one of our engineers in a matter of a couple of hours wrote a little script that said, when I get this alert, isolate the machine, use Carbon Black Live Response, upload this script, capture these files, and download them. All happened automatically. So if the attack occurs at 2 o'clock in the morning, he had an automated response. He had already collected the additional forensic evidence that he wanted for his traditional forensic response. Great stuff. So the idea was to give you a little deeper dive. There's a lot of detail and richness in the product, but I wanted to give you a good overall overview of it and open it up to any additional questions. Yes? No, it's it is a Solr database running on a CentOS server. Just software you install on your own server. And to scale up to a large environment, you can add additional servers to the cluster. Standard server is about 5,000 endpoints. And you can cluster those up to 40,000 at this point. We're looking to scale that higher as well. But we also have management for multiple clusters, so you can install multiple clusters if you're one of the more mega accounts. Yes? Could you say it again? How Bit9 integrates? These events would be shipped over to Bit9. Bit9 can do can generate additional alerts. It can be triggered on these watch lists. Since this has captured the binaries, you've got integration between both. If you see an event in Bit9, you can go to all of the detail, the richness that's available here. So the consoles will point often to the same event, so those events are linked.
Did you say that there was a rule in there, so that signature or that particular file was on another machine to be prevented from stop that?
Yes. Let's go back. So then try to Whoops. It helps if I spell or type. There's other ways to get to it, but I wanted to get to where this is all the detail about that binary that we've collected. So up here, there's ban this hash. So there's another integration point that we just announced, and that's our partnership with Infoblox. So Infoblox is great for DNS, and it's, say Infoblox detects that you've got a botnet running on the machine. They may be preventing that through their DNS, preventing that outbound call, but you've still got an infected machine. We can receive that alert from Infoblox and kill the process that was doing that, and then ban it for all other machines in the environment. So that's an automated integration.
Another question, if we were somehow to identify, let's say, DNS log or something, when we see this machine, this internal machine calling out this domain, can you look at the machine as a whole, see what's going on in that machine, and identify
Yes.
what processes things are involved?
Yep. So, go back to, one of the things you'll notice up here is I've got these facets. I've got machine names here. If I simply clicked on that machine name, all the processes down below will be the processes associated with that machine. And then you can sort them by either start time or duration. So you can look at all the processes down below and then add additional filter criteria. Say, hey, I'm not looking for anything that is, quote, trusted, because in addition to looking up the virus total information for known malicious, we're also looking at our own reputation service, so things that are signed by Microsoft or things that we've given a high trust, you can filter all those out. So you're trying to get down to what is the potentially untrusted events that are occurring. Certainly you can do that. And all of those hot, like, oh, Splunk's probably not the best one. Let me go back here. So when you see down here, I've got all of these blue hot links. In this case, it's a hash value. I can click on that, see where else that hash value has appeared. When it was a domain or an IP address, I can click on that, and it's going to pivot to do a search based on that focus.
So the hash is of the domain that was looked up.
In this case, the hash is of a file. This is the hash value of, in this case, it's a DLL from Microsoft. So if you've got the domain there, it's going to be blue. You click on the domain, it will show you all other processes that have called out to that domain. Any other questions?
Regarding the triage,
Yep.
you said you can ban a file that basically blocks the file for it.
It bans the file from executing? Yes. The same, in essence, the same thing. Same mechanism. And there is an option to kill the process if it is currently running as well.
So, people in the two-way scenario where you have something that's automated isolation,
Right.
function.
Mm-hmm. Not typically. You would only want to do that on something that, that watch list has a very low incidence of false positives. But the thing is, there is an undo. So, we're not erasing any files unless you go in through that Carbon Black Live response and do an actual delete of a file. Right. But you want, on something like that, you would want your buzzer to go off and generate the email. Any other questions? Yes?
So what about legitimate processes where they're legitimate? So like PowerShell.
Right. Well, that's why we're capturing everything. You can't really know what's bad in advance. So in this case, we did have PowerShell being used maliciously, but because we were able to walk back from that instance of PowerShell, I can see what launched it. I've also captured, in this case, the command that it processed. So I've got a lot of information about whether that instance of PowerShell was good or bad. And one of the things that you want to do is Look at your environment. That's why I wouldn't necessarily call it threat hunting, but you'll spend some time looking at how does PowerShell execute in your environment. So if you use PowerShell, there's this process that you use, and here's how that process runs. Put a negate filter on it. Say, except for when PowerShell is used this way, I want an alert when PowerShell is used. So you can do complex Boolean logic in that search criteria. It's not just a single event. It's a combination. So I want to know anytime SVC host is launched when its parent process isn't signed by Microsoft.
So like a process that's, are you capturing only the visualization values of process or the process that was running?
We are capturing cross-process injection as well.
Well, necessarily capturing the running process.
Yeah, that we're going to capture. What we're going to see is that PowerShell executable is doing these things. You run a script that modifies the registry. We're going to say, hey, PowerShell modified this registry event. We're not going to capture that script itself. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.